Now notice, the recession in 2001 was the only one on record in which housing starts did not decline. Now that's very significant, because that shows that Greenspan, instead of letting the economy clear itself out, clear out all these investments that shouldn't have been started in the first place, discourage people from continuing on unsustainable trajectories. Instead of just clearing that all out, it was basically halfway allowed to continue. And because new housing starts didn't decline, it was right at that time that people began to hear the myths of the housing bubble, that housing prices never go down. Apparently everything else goes bust in a recession, not housing. Housing prices never go down. A house is the best investment you can make. You can make quick money by flipping houses. This all takes root because old Allen won't let the economy take its medicine then. And so sure, he holds off the recession. Congratulations. Yep, he held it off. And now look what we're facing. Much worse. Because we've all been on this unsustainable trajectory all those intervening years. Now, I do want to point out that when Mises gives that master builder example, it's not only a good example because it's an analogy of producers investing in things that the economy doesn't have the resources for. It's also a good analogy for what can happen to consumers during these artificial booms. Because during this artificial boom, where housing prices are going through the roof to crazy, crazy levels, people all thought they were richer than they actually were. And they acted on that false belief. They all thought they had more bricks than they really had. So, sure, a $5 cup of coffee at Starbucks, sky's the limit, right? It doesn't make much sense, but I'll do it. $7 ice cream cone, sign me up. This is the way people think. They take out home equity loans, they buy fancy cars, they go on exotic vacations, they do things they wouldn't otherwise have done. They wouldn't have done if they had a real handle on what their actual non-distorted net worth was. So in effect, the Fed, by making debt extremely inexpensive, encourages people themselves as consumers to continue on unsustainable trajectories of consumption that are now being exposed. And people wouldn't have done half the things that they've done had they known the truth. Had interest rates been allowed to tell the truth instead of being forced to lie. Now, sometimes we hear things like, well, you know, the housing bubble and all these asset bubbles, these are fueled really by psychological manias. Like there's just a psychological attachment to particular assets at a given time, and that bids their prices up. Now, I don't want to dismiss that explanation entirely. I do think that is a factor. But psychology alone cannot keep a bubble going as long as this one was going. Because suppose there hadn't been a Fed in the picture. Let's suppose there had been a crazy mania where people just decided they want to buy a lot of houses. What would have happened is that, okay, just as in our case, price of houses would have gone way up, but the banks would have run out of money to lend. So interest rates would have shot up too, and that would have put an end to the speculation in real estate. That would have been it. No housing bubble, and therefore no destruction of people's lives when it goes bust. Well, when you have a Soviet commissar in charge of money and interest rates, who can create all the money he wants to out of thin air, well, he can now flood the banks with additional money, and now it seems like, hey, we've got a ton to lend. Let's keep this phony baloney boom going. So that's why we can't say HGTV caused the housing bubble. Tempting as it is. I mean, you watch that channel, and you feel like, I must be the biggest sucker on earth because I'm not mortgaged to the hilt to have a $750,000 house. Apparently the whole world is buying it. You watch people indignantly turn down $750,000 houses. Yeah, sure, we like the 6,000 square feet, but no gazebo? What is going on here? I mean, we are obviously consumed by some kind of Fed-induced mania here. People don't act like this normally. There's something wrong here. Or the house flipping things, really. You watch those shows. Yep. 4 weeks, I made 50 grand. I mean, I'm telling you, those crooked 30-minute infomercials have nothing on these things. Because people, your neighbor really did make $50,000 doing that. Whereas, whoever made money on John Beck's system, right? Nobody. No, I mean, so anyway. All right, let's get back. Leave poor John Beck out of this. He's not nearly the crook that he is, much as he belongs behind bars, by the way. Now, meanwhile, all this time, the economy is also functioning under what has sometimes been called the Greenspan put. which was the idea that, of course, Greenspan never put into so many words, but that major market actors understood to mean that there was a floor beneath which the central bank would not permit asset prices to fall. So that is to say, go ahead, engage in reckless investing, and if it goes bust, then the monetary authority will pump some money in and bail you out, basically. Now, this is a serious factor here, because consider that I don't remember, in the years of the housing boom and the stock market boom, I don't remember getting a check from AIG or any of these big firms saying, "Dear fellow American, we're just embarrassed by the profits we're making these days. I mean, this is just too much. Enclosed is your proportionate share of the profits. Sincerely yours." However, I did receive kind of a letter from them saying, this whole thing has gone bust, so here's your share of the bill. Well, that's exactly the incentive that is given by the Greenspan put. Let me quote to you from Anthony Mueller, an economist, who says, "Since Alan Greenspan took office, late 1980s, financial markets in the U.S. have operated under a quasi-official charter which says that the central bank will protect its major actors from the risk of bankruptcy. Consequently, the reasoning emerged that when you succeed, you will earn high profits and market share, and if you should fail, the authorities will save you anyway." The Financial Times newspaper described the Greenspan put as the view that when markets unravel, count on the Federal Reserve and its chairman, Alan Greenspan, eventually to come to the rescue. And in the wake of the dot-com boom and bust, the Times likewise said that Greenspan was injecting into the economy a destructive tendency toward excessively risky investment, supported by hopes that the Fed will help if things go bad. Now, what was Alan talking about? About a flaw and difficulty in assessing risk? His own institution, the Federal Reserve System, institutionalizes moral hazard because it creates money out of thin air. It has a very cozy relationship with all major Wall Street actors. So when those Wall Street actors go bust, they then go to the paper money producer and ask for a bailout. Why should this be surprising? Why should anybody on earth not have seen that coming? Now, it's been said in criticism of my argument tonight that after all, we did have booms and busts in American history before there was a Federal Reserve System. So how can you pin the blame for those things on the Fed? Well, of course I can't. I will grant you, in 1819 there was nothing called the Federal Reserve System. So that trivial point I concede. But the substantive point is unchanged, because if you look at the major panics in American history, they all have the same cause. There's no Fed, there's no Alan Greenspan, but they have the same cause. There's either a United States government chartered national bank creating money out of thin air, creating phony baloney booms that are based on sand and that eventually dissolve, or it is private or putatively private banks doing things they'd never be allowed to get away with in the free market, like numerous times throughout the 19th century, when banks would make absurd loans. I mean, ridiculous. During the War of 1812, the New England banks were by and large against the War of 1812, so it was hard for the government to borrow. So a lot of banks in the rest of the country just started up. They had no money in them, and they just started lending. They don't have any actual money, but they're lending anyway. Well, that's the crazy world of banking, if that's possible. But the point is that when that went bust, these banks were told by the federal government, don't worry, you don't have to pay back your depositors. You have 2 years to do it. Well, gee, if I had 2 years, who wouldn't make crazy investments? Who wouldn't be lending out money like mad? I mean, just think of the incentive structure that's created, for heaven's sake. Well, let me quote for you from a contemporary who lived through the Panic of 1837. Now, incidentally, you'll notice panics in American history. 1819, 1837, 1857, 1873, 1893, 1907, then no panics. The government has made our economy panic-proof by just not using the word panic anymore. Now we use the word depression. They don't want to use that word either. So now it's recession. So, I don't know what the next term will be. Sunshine and lollipops or something. I don't know.